In 2010, Big Finish released a set of 4 audios that made up their take on the unmade 27th season of Doctor Who. Put together from thoughts and ideas from those who might have been involved, the set of 4 gave a glimpse of what might have been had the show continued. As detailed in previous episodes of Lost and Found, the authenticity of the final product was maybe slightly on the dubious side, given that it contradicted information already in the public domain. But, at the time, it maybe gave us a sense of closure. Some 15 years down the line, Big Finish have thrown a spanner in Time's workings and presented us with a 5th story for the season called Alixion. This should have been a nice, easy Lost and Found to put together, as the story was written by its originator and, unlike the previous 4 releases, we already had a vague outline of what it was fully about. But having listened to the release, I'm afraid there's a very important question that needs to be asked. How do you solve a problem like Alixion? Remember, nothing was ever even put into motion for Season 27, so pretty much everything is pure speculation. No script was ever completed, no casting or locations were ever put in place, unlike in Season 23. However, unlike the previous 4 stories for Season 27, Alixion started life as a proposal for Season 26 that was deemed not to be in a suitable shape and or able to be made ready for that year. What we do know from this is that the story was definitely a 3-part story, and presuming it had remained that way for Season 27, it means it would have been either the opening story or the last one in the season. The Season 27 overview from the original Lost and Found will fill you in on the working for that. So that we don't tie ourselves up in too many knots too early on, let's also remember that it was only up for consideration and never a definite part of the run. The exact wording being, it was on the list. This allows us to start with the Big Finish version to get a grip on the story, before we have to get into the realms of who would have had a contract to appear in it. We will also skip the 27 Up speculation from the DWM article in issue 255, and try to go with things that are a little more factual, such as a 3-part story would have a very strict running time of no more than 75 minutes. Big Finish do seem to err on the generous side for their Lost stories. The total runtime of their take on the story, which they delivered in 4 parts, is closer to a 5.5 episode marathon, which means that we have to ditch about half of their plot to start to make it broadcastable. We know, from the DWM article on Lost Stories, that the core of Alixion is tunnels and monks. That means that the rather unusual start of the Big Finish version, where we join the Doctor and Ace at the end of an unseen adventure, is a very easy chunk to dispose of. There also isn't really any mention of a leisure spa type environment in the outlines we have had over the years, so that can be put on a potential list of edits. Also, with the most generous outlook I can manage, those scenes with the snot bogs, etc., would have been a drain on the budget which there probably wasn't that much of in the first place. We can, however, stick with the spirit and sort of eventual plot by having the TARDIS arrive and the Doctor and Ace clutching a load of brochures for the spa they expected to arrive in. This would enable the discussions about cocktails to take place whilst they realised they hadn't arrived where they were expecting to. For that traditional touch, they've either arrived before the spa was built or after it's been demolished, thus disposing of another set draining the budget. Episode 1 would be the traditional exploring and strange noises, meeting a couple of characters, more of whom shortly, and then realising they're in terrible danger and beating a hasty retreat to the TARDIS, which leads us into the first Big Finish cliffhanger of the ship having gone missing. From this point on, we have to get a bit creative with things to condense the remaining 3 overly long audio episodes down into 2 television ones. In issue 292, The DWM outline gives the villain as someone called the Abbot. Now, this is a character who doesn't appear in the Big Finish version, but I'm guessing that this would have been the character we meet in episode 1 who clued the Doctor in that everything wasn't as it appeared. We also need 6-foot beetle-type things and the eventual appearance of a queen. So, my suggestion would be that the creatures are only seen in shadows in part 1, saving an eventual reveal for the second cliffhanger. To get from end of part 1 to end of part 2, I'm thinking through some sort of contrivance, they trip and fall or they're squirted by something, we end up in the various flashback scenes as per the Big Finish version, maybe even reusing the Perivale locations from Survival. But initially there would be no clear link to the caves and the Abbot. The eventual cliffhanger would be the reveal that these were dream sequences when we cut back to the Doctor and Ace being strapped down on rocks, insects and beetles milling around them, followed by a crash zoom on the Queen and the Abbot. This then nicely gives us episode 3 as the psychic battle between the Doctor and the Queen, the revelation about the cocktails talked about in part 1, and the eventual freeing of all the monks from whatever control they were under. The psychic battle taking place in the dreamscape would also conveniently allow either VFX to mask what the Queen looked like, thus saving on expensive animatronics, or having most of her stuff with her in a human form. To bring it to a conclusion similar to the Big Finish version, one of the monks who had been imprisoned turns out to be the psychic impulse that originally made the Doctor think about visiting this far in the first place. It would be compact, wouldn't require too many complex sets or locations, and hopefully would keep animatronic insects and beetles to a minimum. That also leaves us with just a couple of minor questions about the story. Namely, how do we get rid of Ace and what's going to happen to the Doctor at the end? One of the things we definitely knew about Season 27 was that Ace was supposed to leave at the end of the second story. That means if Alixion was to be the final story, rather than Ace as the companion, it would have to be someone new. Again, previous episodes of Lost and Found detail a few contradictions about the name and details of that character. To answer those questions, we need to very much throw out what we thought we knew about the story, and also ditch something from the existing Season 27 releases to make room for it. For one potential solution, we can turn to comments made by Ben Aronovich about one of the stories that definitely would have been in Season 27. In the documentary on the Survival DVD, we do get a rare moment of honesty about Doctor Who. The idea that Earth Aid would have definitely been the season opener is called into question when Ben Aronovich gives the blunt assessment that it would have looked tacky had it been made. Weirdly though, it isn't the aliens he's worried about, but instead, he's convinced that a decent spaceship bridge in sci-fi uniforms were beyond the abilities of the BBC, and they would have gone with the historical instead. It's also very worth noting that the aliens in Earth Aid would have been insect-like in nature, meaning if both Alixion and Earth Aid had made it into the season, then it would have been quite a drain on the budget to do 2 insect-based stories close to each other and make everything look distinct and expensive. So, how about this as a compromise? Alixion no longer ends the season, but instead it opens it. This then gets around the other 2 issues that would have needed to be addressed. Who would be the companion? Well, Ace is in the first story, so therefore no need to rewrite it for a different person. And at the end, well, we don't need the Doctor to regenerate. That can be saved for a purpose-written story rather than one that was left over from the previous season. Not convinced? Well, how about this as an unexpected bonus? If we have the Doctor and Ace sharing a dreamscape in this story, then what better chance for the Doctor to poke around in Ace's mind and check that she really is ready for her departure to join the Time Lords in the second story. As I said at the start, when it comes to a potential Season 27, short of inventing a way to travel to a parallel Earth, we have no way of knowing what would have ended up on screen. All we can say is that the Big Finish version of Alixion, whilst a remarkable look at the options, fails to factor in far too many things to be remotely like a potential TV story. Personally, I think it's a shame. We had more things known about this than probably the original 4 stories combined, and yet very little seems to have ended up in the audio. And yes, we would still need a regeneration story of some sort to end the season, but then again, ending a season on the regeneration with no way of knowing what or if anything would come next, even Lost and Found, think that's maybe one step too far into a different reality.